back in the late 60s, very, 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 very late 60s, in the early 70s. I was a hippie and all the stuff that went with that. Had a friend named Roach. Any of you lived in the late 60s, you probably had a friend named Roach as well. And we were both kind of buzzing one Saturday morning. I was sitting by a pond pretending that I was fishing. I had been witness to. Somebody told me about Jesus, how he could completely change my life. And I was under conviction. I didn't know what that meant. I thought I was going crazy. I couldn't get God off my mind. And Roach comes wandering through the woods, and he just popped out of nowhere, man. He found me, just like divine situation. And he said, "What's happening, man?" I mean, like, we had no clue. And I said, "I have no clue." He goes, "Neither do I." And I said to him, "Did you ever think that, I used to think I was on a God quest, but what if he's on a quest for me?" That's pretty neat, isn't it? God's after you. And he gave me the greatest counsel anybody ever gave me. You ready? He said, "Wow, man, like if God ever talks to you, man, listen to him." I responded, "Dude." I only had a 4-word vocabulary in those days. "Wow, man. Cool. Dude." Dude. Really, man, wow. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 23. I found out God is speaking to us. You don't have to play Black Sabbath at 78 speed backwards. I tried that. It didn't work. Most of you have no clue what I just said. Some of you did. For all of you who understood that, I'm praying for you. You figured out where I'm coming from. God doesn't yell over Glory Bannister, "Repent," every 50 years. But he so clearly is speaking to planet Earth through his written word and many other ways. I have just one verse from the Old Testament and one verse in the New Testament tonight as we focus on the amazing nation of Israel. I heard one preacher call Israel God's hourglass. If you want to know what time it is in history of the world, we were taught in school that history's random, man, just stuff happens. No, there's an unseen hand guiding all of history. That's an interesting word, isn't it? History is a compound word. Talk to me. Story. His story. That's what absolutely blew my mind as a new believer in 1972 when I came to Christ, is that history was pre-written. It's not random. There's a Genesis, there's a story, and there's a culmination, there's a revelation. And during these series of lessons, you'll be able to clearly see where we are. We are really edging up, I believe, to the second coming, second advent of Jesus. But if God talks to you, man, listen, watch the nation of Israel. Just one verse in the Old Testament kind of spells this out. 2 Samuel 7, verse 23. 2 Samuel 7:23. "And what one nation in the earth, in the whole world, is like thy people, even like Israel, whom God went to redeem for a people to himself, and to make him a name, and to do for you great things," and terrible, that means awesome, "for thy land, for thy people, which thou redeemest to thee from Egypt, from the nations and their gods." There's never been a nation like the nation of Israel. Started out with an old man, too old to have kids, Abraham and Sarah, and the providence of God and the hand of God and the evident miraculously moving, that unseen hand through everyday people. And Abraham and Sarah, you know the drama. They didn't do it all right. They had an illegitimate child, Ishmael, who became the father of the Arab people, ever a thorn in the side of the Israeli people. They didn't do it all right, but God had made a covenant. When God makes a covenant, it's in stone. It's a done deal. You can go to the bank on it. And God said, I'll make of you a great and mighty nation. We're too old. And then the whole miracle story of the birth of the nation of Israel. Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Isaac's wife Rebekah was barren, and God had to do another miracle there. And Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob and Esau. Jacob was not the son of promise, Esau was not the son of promise. The Messiah will not come through him, he'll come through Jacob. And then we see the whole story of Jacob. And Esau became the father of the Edomites. And the Edomites lived on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus visited the Edomites in his ministry. It's pretty cool. They're cousins, if you please, to the Jewish people, Palestinian people today. They're related. All this goes back to those ancient days. And then the story of Jacob and running from God, and God visited him when he was furthest from God, lied to his father, stole from his brother, fleeing for his life. God visits him, and the hand of God is upon this nation supernaturally to raise them up. Jacob, he repents, and he has 12 sons, later became known as the 12 tribes of Israel. And Satan knows that the Messiah is going to come through that, so what's Satan going to try to do to the nation of Israel? To wipe them out, because if he wipes out the Jews, then the Messiah can't come and he wins. But as you know, in the fullness of time, a virgin brought forth her son, and all those prophecies of the coming of Messiah, Jesus, the first time were all fulfilled. And so you have this miraculous nation that God raised up to be his people, to become a great and mighty nation, to give them their own land. And if you checked out the news today, they're back in that land. We're going to talk about that. It's the main focus tonight. And we have the miraculous story, how they went down into Egypt, and the story of Joseph and the hand of God, what his brothers meant for evil, God meant for good. And he had his hand upon them. And Jacob thinks his whole family's going to die, but we're the Messianic people. And how's God going to save us? And he's got a son. His other brothers led him to believe this dead. And Joseph's down in Egypt. Not only is he alive, he's prime minister of Egypt. And he finds out, and they go down, and God lifts up a mighty nation in Egypt. And they were put into slavery. Then you have the miraculous story of Moses. That's pretty cool. And God had his hand there to deliver them. And it's interesting, you study the great Egyptian culture and all that went on in Egypt, and then they're just destroyed, and secular history seems to kind of wipe that away. How were they destroyed? Well, we've read the scriptures. We know how they were destroyed. And so you have all of these prophecies in the Old Testament about the nation of Israel, and they're all fulfilled. You know, I was reading through the prophets. I read through the Bible every 2 months now, and I was reading some of this minor stuff, what would happen to the Edomites under the reign and the prophecy of Isaiah, and that was all fulfilled. And I realized every prophecy comes to pass to the letter, and people say, kill the prophets, ban the Bible, and that they believe politicians who never tell anything but lies. It's like, I choose the prophets, not the politicians. Somebody say amen. Amen. Thank you, I feel better now. The story of Moses, God brought them out of Egypt, destroyed Egypt. Did you know 2 years ago they found the remains of the Egyptian chariots in the bottom of the Red Sea? All that archaeology was finally, after all these years, was finally uncovered. Of course, they're not going to put that on the news because that just authenticates the message from the scriptures. This stuff, what we read about in the Bible, it all happened. It's called historicity. It's for real. And so, you know, our faith is not, well, you know, let's hold hands and let's burn some incense. That smells good. And let's sing Kumbaya. And now how do you feel? You feeling it? No, we don't have a mystical faith. We have a historical faith. We have the written word of God. We have an empty tomb. We have a risen Savior. What we read about in Genesis chapter 12, the call of Abraham, we can go to modern day Iraq. We can go to Ur of the Chaldees and dig, and we can find out extra biblical evidence of the life of Abraham. It confirms what is in the Bible. I don't need that to believe the Bible, but I like having it around so I can throw it in the face of those who don't believe the Bible. And so we have the marvelous hand of God upon this people like no other people group, but they're a marked people. Satan's going to try to take them out to stop the Messiah from coming, but in the fullness of time, you know, he took his lumps along the way, and a virgin brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes. And what does Satan try to do? Kill him! Put on Herod's heart a jealousy, fear of this baby born king of the Jews, and kill all the babies. But Joseph was tipped off by an angel and flees to Egypt. Herod dies a miserable, painful death. He returns to Nazareth, fulfilling more prophecy. And Christ was raised, he was confounding the scholars with his wisdom at age 12. He begins his public ministry at 30 years old, following the Jewish tradition. Maturity is the age of 30. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. And then Jesus fulfills his ministry, goes to the cross. 13 times the Gospel of John, Satan tries to kill Jesus. But it doesn't work. It's not his time. He said, "Mine hour has not yet come." He's in complete control of the situation. He said, "You don't take my life from me, I lay it down." He was in complete control of everything. He was on mission, mission complete. It is finished on the cross. He descends into hell. I think Satan tries to bind him in hell, but on the morning of the third day, Satan failed again. Jesus rises from the dead. He trains his disciples, ascends into heaven, tells them, "I'm coming back." That is our topic this week. How close might we be to the second coming of Jesus? This morning we looked at some of what I would call general signs. There should be famines and earthquakes and pestilence in different places. The toxic planet, remember your homework assignment. Fresh water, Google fresh water, peak oil, world food reserve, which there is none. And number 4, world bee population. Just get the foundation. Something really yucky is happening in the world. Even anthropologists who know nothing about the Scriptures, who completely reject the Scriptures, understand that we're like in deep, deep doo-doo, you know what I'm saying? And so they don't have any hope, but we do, because it was prophesied. We know what's up behind that. So we have this amazing nation, the nation of Israel, lifted up by God, protected by God. He gave them the priesthood. He gave them the 10 Commandments. He gave them the Levitical law. He gave them the tabernacle in the wilderness. He gave them their own land under Joshua. Against all odds, they conquered an enemy much stronger than themselves. And they built a temple in Jerusalem. The temple went up. It was destroyed by Babylon because the people were backslidden. The next, Babylon fell to Persia. God put on a pagan Persian king's heart, Cyrus, to rebuild the temple. Took secular dollars to rebuild the temple under Ezra, Zerubbabel. And then we had the 400 silent years between the Testament. Then we have the coming of Jesus. The temple's back up, but they're just going through the motions. Jesus threw out the money changers, and we have the hand of God on His people working through history. History's not random. It's all about Jesus. It's all about you and I having eternal life. We live 2,000 years later on the backside of the world. And yet this Jesus that changed the complete history of the world 2,000 years ago when He came, He's still changing people. He changed me 42 years ago, and He's changing this young man over here. And what a joy it is. Now, I want to focus in on some things that just have blown my mind. I want to take you to just one verse in the Gospel of Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 1, verse 24. This is Luke's account of the Olivet Discourse that Matthew wrote in Matthew 24. Luke gives the same account of the same sermon in verse 21. All the general signs that he talked about, remember he said, "I'm leaving, we don't want you to go, but I'm coming back. When are you coming back? No man knows the day or the hour." But Luke also talked about famines, earthquake, pestilence in different places, but he also went from the general to the specific. And that's what I want to draw our attention to tonight. Well, man, if God ever talks to you, listen to Him. God is speaking. Watch the nation of Israel. Luke 21:24, there are 4 prophecies in this verse. Now, I want to do something real quick, just about odds. If we flip the coin, it's 50-50 to get to the flip of the coin right. Second flip of the coin, it's times 0.50 times 0.50, which is 0.25. That's what's called compounding odds. Third flip of the coin times 0.50, it's basically at this point it's 1 in 8. The fourth flip, it's 1 in 16. The fifth, 32. 6, 64, 7, 128, is it? 128, 8 is 256, 9 is 502, and 10 flips of the coin, the odds are 1,004. To prophesy, look into the future, and prophesy the flip of the coin 10 times. This is called compounding odds. It's 50-50 for each flip, times 50-50 for the second, times 50. So the odds are less than 1 in 1,000 to guess the flip of the coin right. Now, if I roll the dice from a Monopoly game, I think half a set of dice is called a die, just one you roll it. It's not 50-50 for the roll of the die. It's 1 in 2 for the flip of a coin. In a die, it's 1 in 6. So that's 0.18 times 0.18, and you'll find that 3 or 4 rolls of the dice is greater odds against getting that right than 10 flips of the coin. This is called odds and compounding odds. Always keep in the back of your mind as we look at a scripture after scripture after scripture in the next few lessons that each prophecy would have its own probability factor. And it's not really scientifically possible to come up with those odds. You know, I mean, if I prophesy that the sun will rise in the east and set in the west, I think the odds are in my favor. But to prophesy that in the month of November it's going to rain 11 times in Albany, New York, it's going to get to the 100th of an inch of rain, and what hours that rain will fall, and come up exactly right, and then do it again in December and do it again, that's not humanly possible. The odds are 1 in a billion. Just keep this in mind as we look at 4 major prophecies in Luke 21:24, what those odds might be for any one of these prophecies. Luke 21:24, when are you coming back, Jesus? He gave the general signs. Famines, earthquake, pestilence in different places, wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things come to pass, but the end is not yet. But he goes from the general to the specific in Luke 21:24. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to break it down as I read it. Luke 21:24 says, and they, you might write in your Bible, the Jews, talking about the Jewish people. And they, the Jews, number 1, shall fall by the edge of the sword. Number 2, they shall be led away captive into all nations. Number 3, Jerusalem shall be trodden down or controlled, taken over by the Gentiles. Number 4, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. 4 prophecies, 1 verse. Now picture it. It's the time of Jesus, and you've heard all this about him, and the religious crowd hates him, but the commoners love him. He is rumored to have healed all these sick and walked on the water, and you're not sure, and you kind of want to check it out because you know Messiah is coming. Is he the one? If he is, I'm following. I don't care what the religious crowd says. I don't care what Rome says. If Jesus is the Son of God, I'm following him. I'm going to jump in with both feet. And you're there, and you're not sure, and you hear Jesus speak. And he says this. And you're thinking, Jesus, that's a little crazy. That's not politically correct. That's not what Jewish ears wanted to hear. The Jews are going to fall by the edge of the sword. You know, that's doomsday stuff. And they'll be led away captive into all nations. That's never happened in the history of the world. When an army conquers another people, they do it for a reason. Love of money is the root of all evil. And they're doing it for financial gain. We're not just going to take all this cost and all this risk and risk these lives and go and fight against you if there's not something in it for us. And so when Jesus said the Jews will fall by the edge of the sword, well, that's happened before. What's the odds of that? Well, there's a lot of nations that fell by the edge of the sword. So maybe 50-50 on that. Some of the nations did, some of the nations didn't. But this one, number 2, they'll be led away captive into all nations. In the history of the world, that had never happened before. Jesus, you're way out on a limb. Are you crazy? Don't say that. Because if a prophet says something that doesn't happen, he's a false prophet and liable for death penalty. So Jesus is way out on a limb. They'll fall by the edge of the sword, cha-ching, and they'll be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem would be taken over by the Gentiles. I mean, that would be like me saying the Polacks are going to take Washington, D.C. It ain't going to happen. It's our holy city. We've been here forever. Even when we fell to Babylon, we stayed here. When the Babylons fell to Persia, we were still here. We didn't govern ourselves, but we were home. You see, we're going to lose Jerusalem? No way, you're crazy, man. And then he fast forwards it. Jerusalem will fall, and then he says, and there'll be the Romans or the Gentiles will be in control of Jerusalem until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled, which means the time when the Jews come back and retake the holy city. Jesus, that was a little out to lunch there, and boy, you didn't make anybody happy with that. And a few days later, they kill him. 3 days later, he rises. But there was division over that. Did he really rise? 500 people saw him, and they gave their lives believing that he did. And so this guy's on the fence. Jesus ascends, and he doesn't know all about that. And all of a sudden now Judaism is divided. There's the Jewish Christians telling everybody about Jesus. And the church just takes off like wildfire, and other Jews persecuted the Christians. He's kind of in the middle. He doesn't want to persecute them. He doesn't want to join them. He's just kind of, I don't know. And then the years begin to pass. Jesus speaks these words in 33 AD, 34, nothing happens, 35, 36. And you fast forward, 70 AD. Here comes military general Titus under Nero, emperor of Rome. He'd been sent on mission to fight against the Egyptians, whoop their butts. Excuse me, I'm from Ohio, I can talk this way, amen. Whoop their butts. And on his way home, he stops off in Jerusalem. And we have what's called in history the fall of Jerusalem. 70 AD, under military General Titus of Rome. And the prophecy of Jesus, cha-ching, was fulfilled to the letter. Number one, the Jews fell by the edge of the sword. Number two, scattered into all the world. It had never happened in the history of the world before, but it did happen to the Jews. And for almost 2,000 years, they were called the wandering Jew. They had no homeland. And yet God prophesied that they would remain a biologically distinct group of people through the millenniums. And the Jews were scattered. Jews no longer controlled Jerusalem. The Gentiles took over. Unthinkable! But it happened. What's the odds on that? The Jews to be scattered. What's the odds on the Gentiles taking over Jerusalem? And then we're going to fast forward again to the last part of that prophecy. And here's this guy that he was on the fence. Well, Jesus said this, but it never, and I don't know. And now this guy, if he was 20 years old when he heard Jesus say that, now he's like 55 years old, and everything Jesus said happened exactly the way he said it would. But then we're going to push the fast forward button here again. The Jews had been wondering for 2,000 years. And Jesus said many passages in the Old and New Testament that Jews would come home. But this is even more specific. Coming home to their land, that's one thing. That happened in 1948. They'd come back and retake their holy city, Jerusalem. That's what Jesus said. Well, man, if God talks to you, listen to him. And here's what's so cool. And this is what I'm going to be trying to show you tonight and throughout these next few days. God says this is what's going to happen. And it always happens. But if you don't know what God says is what's going to happen, then you don't know what's happening. Then you listen to the news, and it's just bad news. It's random, and it's bad. And what are we going to do now? We'll have elections. The politicians will fix it. Yeah. I feel so sorry for people that there's hope. The Jews wondered. No homeland. In the year 1899, a guy named Theodore Herzl was the founder of what was called the First Zionist Congress. Zionist, the Holy Temple Mount is called Mount Zion, where the temple was built. Zionists are Jewish people, or a Gentile. I'm a Zionist. I believe that land belongs to Israel. Okay, I believe God gave it to them. I know they beat up the Canaanites who were there. They were evil people, but I believe God gave that land to Abraham through Joshua and all that. And so, Zionist, somebody believes that land belongs to God. God gave that land to the Jewish people, and the Zionists were praying that the Jews could return and fulfill biblical prophecy that they would return home. 1899, First Zionist Congress, and they were praying for a homeland. And the League of Nations, which is the predecessor of the United Nations, had offered them in the earliest part of the 20th century. They had offered them sections of land in Africa. Go to Africa. That'll be your Jewish homeland. They said, no, we don't want to go to Africa. We want to go home. We want to go back to the land that God gave our father Abraham and conquered by Joshua. We want to go home. They said, it's crazy. It'll never happen. It's held by Islamic people. They hate your guts. It's never going to happen. Don't be real. Take this. No, we want to go home. And Palestine, which Israel was called in those days, was part of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, another Islamic attempt at a caliphate for Islamic, one world Islamic situation. The Ottoman Empire, closest thing they've ever had to a caliphate. Palestine, what we call Israel today, was held by the Turks for over 400 years. In World War I, Germany had a naval blockade around South Africa, which England and America and our allies got our source of nitrates necessary to make gunpowder to carry on the war machine. And so Germany had a blockade around South Africa to try to stop the flow of nitrates. But a British scientist named Chaim Weizmann discovered a way to extract nitrates from the air. There's nitrates and nitrogen in the air. To extract it from the air through fans and filters. And he discovered a way to produce nitrates in England, which now means the German Navy blockade around South Africa is just wasting their time and resources. And of course, the Germans think, well, we're going to win this thing because we stopped that we blockaded that, not knowing that Chaim Weizmann discovered a way to provide nitrates for the English people. And so the British Parliament calls Chaim Weizmann in to say thank you before the British Parliament. And they say to Chaim Weizmann, how can we say thanks? Chaim Weizmann just happened to be a Jew, a member of the Zionist Congress. England, towards this stage of World War I, had seen the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, and England had taken control over that little piece of real estate, 1% of the Middle East land base, then called Palestine, we call Israel today. England had control. They'd had control for like 1 week. In comes Chaim Weizmann. How can we say thank you? His request, open Israel, Palestine, for Jewish immigration. It's called the Balfour, B-E-L-F-O-U-R, Balfour Declaration, signed in November of 1917. The Balfour Declaration in England. And for the first time since 70 A.D., Jews were welcome to come home. Not as a nation, but as Jewish people. Under British control, the Jews were welcome. January 1st, 1918, the first boatloads of Jews came home. November 1917, the Balfour Declaration. January 1918, the first boatload of Jews are home. In the Bible, there's an age of maturity. A little while ago, I told you what it is. How old was Jesus when he began his earthly ministry? How old did you have to be to become a Levitical priest? How old was John the Baptist when he began his earthly ministry? 30. 30 is the biblical age of maturity. 1918, I'll call that conception, plus 30, 1948. Now, did anything happen to the Jewish people between 1918 and 1948? Yeah. A little guy named Hitler kind of didn't like the Jewish people. I believe he was influenced and empowered by Satan. And he was empowered by the enemy to wipe out 6 million of the Jews. And along with about, another 100 million people, 50 to 100 million people died in World War II as a result of one madman. And when it was found out, the Holocaust, the world was shaken, the Western world was shaken by that atrocity. And for the first time ever, there was like a little sympathy given to the Jews. And in May 11th of 1948, 327,000 Zionist Jews are home. And they raise the six-pointed Star of David flag. And Israel is reborn among the modern states of the world, fulfilling many biblical prophecies. Against all odds, 327,000 Jews surrounded by a multitude of Arab nations, it's all Islamic nations who hate the Jews' guts, and in Islam they do not even believe in Israel's right to exist. And God said, I'll bring you home and you'll be surrounded by your enemies. If you want to just mark this down in your mind, I'll cheat and quote it to you. But Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3, as the prophet Zechariah looks down through the corridor of time, he sees this. He sees the dispersion, the diaspora of the Jews. He sees the Jews come home. In Zechariah 12:3, he says, when the Jews come home, they'll be surrounded by their enemies. And all who fight against Israel shall be cut into pieces against all odds. It's not going to, but you'll see, if you know what the prophets say, and you watch what happens in history, you'll see that the prophets are never wrong. So why would you want to trust politicians who are never right? I mean, we got to vote for somebody, and who's going to represent us well and do right. But my hope is not in politics. And I'm registered and I vote, and I'm very aware of who I'm voting for and why. Of course, in New York, we don't have a lot of good choices, so y'all pray for me. I got to win a lot more people to Jesus. But we're not going to win this thing in the ballot box. We're going to win it on our knees. We're going to win it with open Bibles. It's the back of the book that gives me my hope. 327,000 Jews are back in the land, and in the providence of God, they needed the United States to recognize them as a nation. And if we did that, we're in big trouble with the oil producers. And against political expediency, Harry Truman, President of the United States at the time, had a friend, an old friend, that he used to be in business together with from Kansas City, Missouri. Had a haberdashery, a men's apparel shop, and it was unsuccessful. And that man happened to be a Jew. And frustrated with his failure here, he went back to Israel to help rebirth the nation. He flies back on his own dime, gets audience in the Oval Office, crawls into the Oval Office on his hands and knees, and he begs Harry Truman, his buddy, to recognize Israel. And against all political expediency, Truman did. And God blessed America. You take from 1948, man, God put his hand of blessing on us. God will bless those who bless the Jew. He'll curse those who curse the Jew. Look what happened to Germany because of their cursing of the Jew. God will bless those who bless the Jew. He'll curse those who curse the Jew. And he blessed the Jews. There are so many amazing miracles of that era, their revolution, their independence, their fight for independence, because the moment they declare themselves a nation, they are attacked by Lebanon from the north, Syria from the northeast, Iraq just behind Syria, Iran just on the other side of Jordan. Jordan attacked them. And the modern state of Israel, when it was divided up, 327,000 Jews against 100 million Arabs. Who are you going to put your money on? Well, I cheated. I read Zechariah. Prophets are never wrong. I'm going to put my money on Israel. They won their war of independence. You have to study the Golda Meir. Remember, some of you older people remember Golda Meir was prime minister of Israel for a number of years. Golda Meir was a fifth grade grammar school teacher in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. As a young woman, she felt her life, there was something more to do in life than teach school. Single woman, she moves to Israel to help rebirth the nation, to rebuild the nation following the Holocaust. And she was sent, she came on her own dime to America to try to raise like $6 million to buy some arms. And she was going to be here for like 2 weeks. She's only here for like 6 days, raised like $20 million, made a huge arms deal, just small arms basically for those are the weapons that were used by the 327,000 Jews for the nation to be rebuilt. Now, when the nation, this would be the shoreline, the Mediterranean Sea. The modern state of Israel looked something like this in 1948. If we're going to bet on Israel's chance of survival, we would say 1 in 1,000, unless we cheated and read the Bible. Well, guess what? They won. They were using little Cessna airplanes, opening the side door, throwing out bombs left over from World War II to stop the enemy. And against all odds, you can study this stuff out. It's just unbelievable. There's a fantastic book, secular book, called Our Man in Damascus that has been one of my main resources for all of this. Secular book, but you would not realize it. So the nation looked like this. This big bubble in the middle is the West Bank, occupied by Jordan, okay? Palestine, Israel, was never, the Palestinians never had autonomy. It was the Turks for 400 years, and before that it was the Greeks and the Islam. And they were never had a state. There's never been a Palestinian state. This was held by Jordan, of the King Hussein, not Saddam Hussein, but the King Hussein royal family of Jordan. They've been they've been fairly peaceful towards the state of Israel, except in 1967. Now, up on this section is what's called the Golan Heights. This is all below sea level here. We have the Sea of Galilee right in here. The Jordan River comes off of Mount Hermon. Hermon, they say Hermon, Mount Hermon in the north. And the Jordan, and down in here we have the Dead Sea. On the Golan Heights, Syrian soldiers sat from 1948 to 1967, snipers, and shot innocent Jews trying to farm in the valley below. It's the breadbasket of Israel, very agricultural area. And the United Nations did nothing. 1967, Lebanon to the north, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt all declare war on Israel. But God said, all who fight against Israel shall be cut to pieces. In June 1967, they declare war on Israel, but the Jews were, much to their surprise, were ready. When in the Israeli Air Force, their jets, their fighter jets, are occupied. There are Israeli pilots sitting in those jets right now, ready to push a button. And they'll do an 8-hour shift sitting there waiting, because in the moment's time, they'll be in the air. That happened in 1967. In the history of military aviation, in the 67 war, the Jews were out airplaned 10-1 with planes. It was like 3-1 with tanks, or 4-1. I think it was more like 4-1 with tanks. And it was 12-1 with soldiers. Now, what are the odds? Israel's only 10 miles wide at this point. 10 miles wide. And the plan in the 67 war was the Syrians were going to send, they had 2,500 tanks to send down across Golan. Jerusalem is right here on the edge of the West Bank, occupied by the Arabs still, by the Jordan. The Egyptians had 5,500 tanks coming up from the Sinai. Their plan was to encircle the Jewish, and they expected the main Jewish resistance by tanks. The Jews had 2,500 tanks. There would be the big battle here. They would come down off the Golan and surround the Israeli army, win here south of Jerusalem. They figured they could do that in 3 to 6 days. But what they didn't realize is the moment they got their act, well, that's it, we've had enough, we're going after them. At that moment, every Israeli plane is in the sky. In the history of military aviation, you flew over your enemy, dropped bombs. To resist that, you got anti-aircraft guns to shoot the planes out of the sky, reconnaissance aircraft to do dogfights to fight them out of the sky, and radar to detect them coming. In the history of military aviation, you flew higher and faster and better reconnaissance, higher and faster, until 67. The Jews did the exact opposite. They came in under the radar. They were flying supersonic speeds, jets, under the radar. They were dropping bombs at 50 feet above their targets. And people thought, it's not possible to have a percussion bomb flying so low. The percussion of the bomb will blow the plane right out of the sky. True. But the Jews took bed sheets, made parachutes for their bombs, just like I did as a little boy. I'd take a little army guy, make a little parachute out of a handkerchief, throw it up. They did that. They took bed sheet bombs. There's a story called the Eli Cohen story. Our man in Damascus. Eli Cohen was a Jew. He disguised a Jewish spy, disguised himself as a furniture tycoon out of Argentina. Immigrated to Syria, to Damascus. Damascus, Syria is about right in here. Became friends with all the top military brass, as every spy wants to do. He was personally escorted to the military installations along the Golan Heights. He said to his Syrian military generals, he said, y'all are so cruel. You have all these troops up here, you have no shade. And the Syrians said, well, nothing will grow up here. It's a desert most of the time. He said, well, the Jews brought in eucalyptus trees from Australia. They'll grow here fine. Good idea. They planted eucalyptus trees along all their illustrations. I've been up there several times. I've seen them. They're big. They're real big now. And when the war broke out, Eli Cohen wires Tel Aviv, which is down here. He wired Tel Aviv, bombed the eucalyptus trees. The Jews flew in under the radar, dropped their bedsheet bombs. Every bomb hits its target on the Golan and they wipe out the military installations. Not all the tanks, but the military installations. They wiped out 90% of the Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian, Iraq, and Iranian air forces on the ground. They couldn't even, in the 10% of the planes that were not destroyed on the ground, flying in under the radar, the 10% that survived the first wave were not able to get into the air because the Jews dropped cluster bombs on all the runways. And within 12 hours of the operation, in the 6-day war, the Jews had complete dominion of the sky. It's ultimately going to be called the Miracle 6-Day War, but it really should have been the Miracle 1-Day War. If the Arabs would have had a brain, they'd have surrendered at that point because they had lost any hope in the sky. But they figured we have them so outnumbered with the tanks. They're going to get some of us, but they can't get all of us tanks. And so a couple amazing things happen. And you're never going to hear this in the secular news, but it's out there. Our Man in Damascus is a book that you can get hold of. You can Google a lot of this stuff. The Eli Cohen story, bombing the eucalyptus trees. The Jews had 25 tanks in the Golan against 2,500. It's 100 to 1 odds. It's over 2 to 1 here in the Sinai. They have no defense. And the commander of the 25 tanks, this is June 4th, 1967, remembered the ancient story of Gideon, who had an army of 100 million Amalekites he had to face, or Midianites. And he's got 33,000 show up to help him. 3 against 1. God said, you got too many. Send the scared people home. 23,000 went home. Now he's got 10,000 troops against 100,000. God said, you got too many. Send everybody out to get a drink. Everybody puts their faces down in the water. Send them home. Only the people who raise the water up this way, those are you guys you need. 9,700 of them went home. Now he's got 300 men against 100,000. God can save by many or God can save by few. You remember that story. He said, "O God of my father Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you're the one who brought us here. You said, when you brought us here, nobody will destroy us." And so he began to remember that story, and he began to see in that story of Gideon, the reason it worked is because in those days, every 1,000 soldiers, every infantry of 1,000 soldiers had one trumpeter, had one lamp bearer. So Gideon said, you don't need a sword, you need a lamp and you need a trumpet, or a shofar, ram's horn. So they surround the enemy at night, and the enemy was kind of half drunk and partying, they're celebrating the victory before it was won. And they wake up to Gideon surrounded them, 300 men. They lit their torches for communications in the night, and they blew their trumpets. And the enemy wakes up, wait a minute, and they're surrounded. And when they see 300 torches, they're figuring there's 300,000. They were furious at their own leadership to be so stupid to lead them into this ambush. And they totally freaked out and they killed each other. A great victory was wrought in the story of Gideon in Judges chapter 8, 3,000 years ago. 1967, June 4th, their tank commander said, what the heck, we got the same God? He began to speak to each of his tanks as though each of those tank officers were tank commanders leading a battalion of 100 tanks. And so all of a sudden, Private Moshe gets a radio message from his general, but he's not called Private Moshe, he's called Commander Moshe. I just got a raise. And without previously setting this up, they all kind of understood what he was doing. Thank God for the Soviet Union. They intercepted those communications. And immediately, Moscow wires Damascus, Syria, and says somehow the Jews got 2,500 tanks up to the Golan. Retreat. The Syrians retreated. And as they begin to now they'd already wiped out the military installations through the bedsheet bombs, bombing the eucalyptus trees. Now those 25 tanks cross the Jordan River and wipe out 167 of the Syrian tanks who were retreating. And they completely take the Golan Heights overnight. And Then in the morning, as satellite communications came in, they found out 2,500 Jewish tanks were still here. And then Russia accused America of somehow getting 2,500 tanks over there, and there never were any tanks at all. It was just, excuse me, it was just God doing his thing. I know that's, maybe not everybody believes that, but that's how I see it. It was God doing exactly the same thing today as he did in ancient days, to put his hand to bless his people, to protect his people. They take the Golan Heights. Syria, that was the best thing that happened to Syria. They didn't lose all, they only lost 167 tanks. They didn't lose everything. They lost the Golan Heights. But down in the south, the coolest thing happened. This is called in history the surrender in Sinai. You can Google that too. The surrender in the Sinai. Egypt thought, well, we don't have the Syrians to help us, so they're not going to surround here, but hey, 5,500 to 2,500, odds are still way in our favor. So they're already, the tanks are amassed in their battalions, in their orders, in their positions for the battle to begin. Word had come from Cairo to advance. And before even one shot was fired, something amazing happened. 5,500 Egyptian tanks, engines turn off, hatches open, 5,500 white flags. They surrendered without firing a shot. They did not retreat. They did not fight. They surrendered against high command. The Jews mercifully allowed them to surrender, stripped them down to their boxer shorts, T-shirts, and shoes, and made them walk back to Egypt, gave them plenty of food and water, made them walk home. The Jews got in those 5,500 tanks. Now you have 8,000 tanks heading to Cairo with no tanks and no Air Force. And the United Nations said, stop. The war's over. We demand it shall stop. I find that interesting. And they stopped. And those tanks, though obsolete, are still held by the Jews today. They can still shoot. I find it interesting that the United Nations wouldn't raise a finger to stop advance against Israel. Israel did not provoke this war. They did not start this war. They were attacked. But the moment the Jews had complete dominion, the United Nations interfered and stopped it. I find that very interesting. The surrender in the Sinai. When those Egyptian tank commanders got home, they faced an angry court-martial. Most of them were shot for treason and traitors to their own nation, breaking high command. They were asked, why did you surrender when you had orders to fight? You were not there. I was not there. They were there. Here's what they said, quote, we saw angels on the Israeli tanks and we were afraid to try to fight against God. They never told me that in public school. Dear old Walter Cronkite never even told me that. But that evidence is right there for you. Wanting. Go after it. Wow, man, if God ever talks to you, man, listen to him. Israel won the war. It's called the Miracle 6-Day War. In the war, they took the Golan Heights, as a military buffer zone. It's about 20 miles wide and about 15 miles wide and about 40 miles long, the Golan Heights. Great agricultural area. Been up there many times. If you go up there, stay on the path. There's live landmines all over the place. You don't want to go there. They took the Sinai from Egypt, which is about 3 times the size of the modern state of Israel. They gave that back to Egypt in the Camp David Accord under Jimmy Carter, the Camp David Accord. And the Egyptian Anwar Sadat, who brokered that deal of peace with Israel was, the following week, was murdered in Egypt because of their hatred for the Jews. But that peace has kind of continued throughout the years. They took the Sinai, which they later gave back. They took the Golan Heights. They took the Gaza Strip from Egypt, where they've given that back to the Palestinian people. Of course, it's from there that all these rockets are being launched. They took the West Bank from Jordan. But more importantly, right on the edge of the West Bank, for the very first time since 70 AD, the fall of Jerusalem, they retook the holy city. In the afternoon, the late afternoon of June 6, 1967, I watched this on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite for the first time in almost 2,000 years. The Jews came through the Damascus Gate with tanks and military garb, and they went to the western wall of the Temple Mount, built by Solomon. They call it the Wailing Wall, the most sacred site on the planet for the Jewish people. Jesus, when are you coming back? There'll be wars and rumors of wars. The world will be on fire. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and earthquake and pestilence. And socially, it'll be just like Sodom and Gomorrah, men with men doing that which is unnatural, women with women. That's back. My governor, Andrew Cuomo, said to our state, anybody who is pro-life and pro-traditional marriage is no longer welcome in the state of New York. But I'll have you know I did not put my house up for sale. He didn't bring me there, and he's not going to run me out. He may throw me in jail, but I preach in the jail every Sunday night anyway. I like jail ministry. Some things are worth going to jail over, and I'll do jail time for that. Paul did okay in jail. I'm not trying to be Mr. Crazy, Mr. Bold, and throw me in jail. I don't want to go to jail. I'd rather preach to you than preach in the jail, but I can do either or. The Lord will be with me on the outside, or He'll be with me on the inside, if that's what it takes. It'll be just like Sodom and Gomorrah. It'll be just like the days of Noah. The world will be filled with violence. And all that's here. When are you coming back, Jesus? More specifically said, well, the Jews will befall cha-ching, 70 AD. They'll be led away captive in all the nations of the world, cha-ching, the wandering Jew, remaining a biologically distinct group of people for 2,000 years without a homeland. And Jews would gather out of all the nations of the world and come home and retake their land. But more specifically, that happened in 1948. But more specifically, they would take Jerusalem. And I've been there many times in their home. It's one of the major signs. When he says that you watch the fig tree is a type or picture of Israel. When you see the leaves come forth on the fig tree, you know the summer is near. So likewise, when you see the rebirth of the modern state of Israel, it says, this generation shall not pass. How long is a generation? I don't know. That's debatable. Is it 30 years? Is it 40 years? Is it 70 years? I don't know. But they're home. I'll leave that to God. Well, man, if like God ever talks to you, man, listen to Him. God is speaking. People say, show me a miracle and I'll believe. What do you want? God said, this is what I'll do. And He did it. Now when God says, when you see this happen, look up. His coming is near. I am more confident of Jesus' second coming than I am even that my name really is Duke. I have no doubts. 10,365 prophecies in the Bible for a reason. Every one happens to the letter. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. 2 Timothy 3:12. But as everything gets ready to implode, we're going to look at the rise, the alignment of the nations, the economics of the world. We're going to look at that our last service. It's getting really close. Great news for us who believe. We're almost home. Almost home. I love going out on the road doing what I do, but I get homesick. I got a beautiful wife. I got awesome kids. They all serve the Lord. I have a little homestead. I raise a lot of my own food. I have rabbits, chickens, ducks, turkeys, and goats. I milk goats. I mean, I live off the land best I can, and I love all that. But preaching the gospel is more important, sounding the trumpet. And I hope it just overwhelms you a little bit. History's not random. There's an unseen hand guiding history. When are you coming back, Jesus? Well, the Jews are going to come home and retake their holy city. Against all odds. There's been 7 major wars since Israel was reborn, not counting all this rockets and all that stuff, going after Hamas and Lebanon and the Gaza. They don't even count that. 7 major wars. Guess how many the Jews have lost? Prophet said when they come home, nobody's going to drive them away. They're coming home for good. Now, they got a big adversary looming soon called the Antichrist. He'll be the final persecutor of Israel. He's going to make Hitler look like a decent guy. He's going after the Jews. We'll study about that tomorrow night.